For the final session of day 2 of the Covering Equitable Community Development Journalism Training, we're going to be focusing on childcare. Across the country, collaborations are forming to address the very central role that childcare plays in community development, in economic prosperity for families and communities. In this region, the Missoula Economic Partnership is leading the way in amplifying the need for more support and involvement from the business community. We're joined today by Grant Kier. He is the CEO of the Missoula Economic Partnership. He's working for a diverse and resilient economy in the Missoula region. During his tenure, the partnership has served as the community's COVID economic relief and recovery lead, supported growing small businesses, and advanced efforts to understand and address a whole range of issues from housing affordability to childcare availability. Next, we're joined by Sally Henkel. Sally is the Missoula Child Care Advantage Coordinator for 0 to 5 Missoula, which is an initiative of the United Way. She's brought years of communications and logistical experience with nonprofits to that job, and she works closely with groups like the Missoula Economic Partnership to identify opportunities to support families who need access to quality child care. And finally, we're joined by River Yang. She is the founder and director of Montessori Plus International. It's one of the highest quality early childhood educational programs in Montana. River was honored with the Early Childhood Direct Service Award by Healthy Start Missoula in 2021 and recognized as Montana's highest level early childhood practitioner. And she's a dedicated early childhood educator and professional development specialist. So we've got the range here of people who can talk about how childcare fits into the whole community development formula. So I'm grateful to all of you for joining us. And I'm going to flip tradition here and start with the guy instead of having him wait to be last. But Grant, in our pre-interview, you talked about a pretty specific time that helped me sort of frame my thinking around how the partnership comes together, and that is right before COVID. And there were a lot of things going on socioeconomically in Missoula and in the region that you told me about that helped me to understand the progression of issues. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, thank you. Before I start, I just want to say thanks for having us, and I want to say how inspiring it is to see a lot of young faces in the audience today. The work that all of you do in your communities is incredibly important for the future of our nation and our democracy. So I'm delighted to have you all here, and I'm grateful for being a part of the day. Missoula Economic Partnership benefited from really a visionary mayor in our community who was here for almost 2 decades. He's since passed away, unfortunately, but he was somebody who really understood that running a city was about serving people. And prior to COVID, Missoula was experiencing a lot of the trends that I think a lot of the West was experiencing, which was we were starting to see a little pressure around housing affordability, but we were fundamentally starting to see that disparity of people who had wealth and were successful and people who didn't growing greater and greater. And in that context, our mayor asked us to, as an organization, really dig into what it would look like to develop programs that gave young people who grew up here the confidence that this was a place they could build a future. So we did a research project to understand if we could create a program that we'd call the Missoula Promise. And these promise programs exist across the country. What was unique about ours is we were exploring how we might create a promise that would tell every family in Missoula that if you had a child here, we would cover the cost of your child care until they went to kindergarten. And if you graduated from high school here, we would cover the cost of college until you finished at least 2 years of a degree program. And in the research of doing that program, our organization really came to understand how incredibly challenging childcare was to provide, how rare it was to find as a parent, and also how transformative it was to invest in that one thing to make a huge difference in the trajectory of a human being's life forever. And so as an organization, that's when we really started to wrestle with childcare as being a really fundamental part of how we thought about the success of our economy.
Let's talk about the economy of the region. What you told me that timber was a huge part of the mix, and that jobs in that sector have dropped. So tell me a little bit more about the different sectors in this region.
Yeah, so we are a timber town. For 100 plus years, we were a timber town, and really our organization started when some of the last big paper and wood products industries started to evaporate. And a group got together and said, we have to think about our economy differently than these old extractive industries, and really think of a new economy that creates a more diverse set of jobs that can scoop up a lot of the unemployed people in our community and give them pathways to prosperity, essentially. And in that process, we realized that diversity was fundamental, and I think I'm going to be really honest, made a huge mistake as an organization. We assumed that the way to succeed was to create higher paying jobs in our community. And so as in the sort of like 2005, 2010, and since, there's a lot of effort to attract and grow tech jobs and sort of high wage jobs that would really give people pathways to greater wealth. In that process, our economy has changed and transitioned. We did a great job of building a much more diverse economy, building a much more professional services-oriented economy, building an economy that had a lot more pathways for people to have career paths. What we didn't know in that process, and what a lot of sort of current economic research is telling us, is that when you create high-wage jobs and you make that a priority and you forget about this set of things called mid-wage and mid-skill jobs, you actually exacerbate that expansion of the haves and have-nots and create a bigger gap in those who are unable to find ladders of opportunity. And so the crux there is that you essentially create a community where your cost of living is exceeding the pace at which wages grow in the local community, and it becomes unaffordable. And a lot of communities had pursued this during the same time period, and a lot of communities are suffering for having essentially no middle class left, is what we used to call it, or no mid-wage, mid-skill jobs that give people who are starting out the chances to climb up those ladders of opportunity to get to the higher wage jobs.
How did COVID impact that whole mix?
We were under strain before COVID, and everything was on steroids during and since COVID. And so every tiny crack and crevice that was a weakness became an enormous task and undertaking and challenge. And so housing affordability is now historically challenging and difficult. The challenges around healthcare went from strain to a crisis. And so a lot of things that frankly, when our board met in 2019, we were really looking at a new strategic plan and direction for our organization. And we all felt like we probably have a decade to wrestle with some of these challenges. And if we're really smart and we're really thoughtful, we might just get this right and sort of be a community that is a model for others. And by 2 years later, we were all sitting around thinking, what on earth had just happened? Like the decade that we thought we had evaporated in about 18 months.
We've had some really powerful lived experience conversations today from some of our speakers. And I told Grant that in my training at NPR, I try to dig that out of people. I'll try to connect what they do and why they do it with a lived experience. Sometimes as journalists and as general public, we think of business leaders as being in a different category. They're all affluent, or they're all whatever, and we don't necessarily connect them to issues like childcare and whatever. But Grant has a really interesting lived experience and backstory that puts him squarely in the middle of this issue, and I'd like for you to share that with us.
Thanks. So I will say I'm data driven, right? And so I was inspired and excited about the notion that our organization should care about childcare and try to elevate the issue in our community. But it was also a little bit of a relief for me because when I was about 6 months old, my father informed my mother that he had not actually wanted a second kid, and he left our house and essentially walked away from my mom and my brother and I and left her to raise the two of us by herself. She was she still is an incredible woman, but was very brave at the time and took my brother and I to Colorado from Kansas, and left her family and her support network to leave a town where she felt sort of stigmatized by being divorced. And so she took us to Colorado and raised us as two boys as a single mom until I was a teenager, so more than a decade when she was remarried finally. But I very vividly remember the stress as a kid of a parent who couldn't make ends meet, who frankly could rarely, if ever, afford health care or childcare. And my mom was a nurse, and I spent a lot of my time as a small child actually in her waiting room after school, as opposed to just being a latchkey kid at home. My big brother was also a little bit, wasn't the friendliest, so the safest place to be was in the waiting room at the doctor's office. But it really, my mom was able to build a life for herself and has done incredible things. But the challenges she faced that I saw at moments in her life around not having the support network and a place to put her kids where she felt like they were safe and secure were profound. And when she did find those things, I knew firsthand about what it meant to me in terms of the difference of what I felt in terms of security, safety, and the ability to learn and grow and be comfortable.
Powerful, right? As you're interviewing and looking around your community for resources, always ask that question. Always find out what motivates people. Before we go to Sally, because I know you've put together some slides.
A brief presentation.
A brief glimpse into the issue. I want to ask you, Grant, about having the childcare conversation around the conference room table, around with groups of business leaders. Many of them, again, come from a different perspective, maybe than the single working mother who, is looking for childcare. How do those conversations flow? Do people get it? Are they on board automatically?
Everyone's not on board automatically, but if I can do any service to the business community, I think it's to encourage people to to always dig deeper into the business leaders you're talking to, because they are so frequently people too. And I think one of the insights I've learned fundamentally, especially about small business owners, is they are in many cases not that different than the folks who are struggling for childcare. They are holding their businesses together by a thread. They are struggling every day to make sure that they keep the doors open, and they are losing sleep over whether they can pay their employees. And so a lot of them want good things to happen in their communities. I am lucky because I work for a board of directors that are the CEOs of some of our biggest employers and institutions, and they are authentically and deeply committed to the health of our community. So I do want to pull back that curtain a little bit. But I also want to say not everyone feels that way. And for many, many people, it comes down to the bottom line. And so part of what we felt like our responsibility as an organization is to ensure that we had a message for everyone about the importance of this issue. And one of the most challenging things that every business in our community is facing is a lack of workforce. And if you understand demographic trends well, this is not a COVID phenomenon, this is a baby boomer phenomenon. And demographers had been warning our country for decades that this time was coming when baby boomers would all leave the workforce at paces never seen before. And so when that happens, that puts a huge strain on people to find the employees to take their jobs. And they essentially need every single person who is capable and willing to be at work in order to fill the number of jobs. So our state right now has 41,000 job openings, and there are only 13,000 people who are available to work and not working. So that gap is a huge strain on employers. And childcare adds to that strain. Childcare creates a situation where a young family, whether it's the father or mother, can't get back to work because it is more expensive to pay for childcare than to go back to the job. Or they simply can't find childcare, and so there's no place for them to put their child where they can get back to the workplace. And so understanding that dynamic and being able to articulate it clearly to employers, to motivate them to see that they win when we invest in childcare has been a big part of our commitment to this issue.
I'm going to step aside here, and Sally, please walk us through your presentation.
Sure.
Do you have, oh, here's the clicker for you.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the end of probably a really long day. And see, I told you I was going to mess it up already. My name is Sally Hinkle. I work for a program called 0 to 5 Missoula County, which stems out of our local United Way. I'm going to keep this kind of brief, but the reality is that childcare solutions are complicated because childcare is a deeply complicated issue. And I'll leave plenty of room for questions. So as I mentioned, I worked for 0 to 5 Missoula County. We really strive to ensure that children 0 to 5 are ready to go to kindergarten and are like set up for success, essentially. Research tells us that the ages between 0 to 5 are the most fundamental for kids' brain development. Quality care is essential. And we do this by finding gaps. We find gaps, we find collaborators, we bring people together. We try to find solutions to the gaps in our community. And at the end of the day, what we want to do is create a more well-coordinated system. If people aren't talking to each other, if things are too disconnected, nothing's really going to move the needle, right? So these are some of the work that we do at 0 to 5. We empower parents. We do a kindergarten entry assessment, early learning fellows. I really live in the accessibility, affordability to childcare, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. And before we do that, we have to understand the problem. And Montana is not unique. Can you guys see? I feel like I'm kind of standing in your way. Montana is not unique in our childcare struggles, right? We expect childcare to be a necessity of high quality, and yet we also know that it's scarce, it's hard to find, it's challenging for parents, like what Grant mentioned. It's expensive. I have a 2.5-year-old, and wowee, we're in it. And at the same time, it's poorly paid, as you can see over here, and it's struggling. We know that childcare is a broken business model. It takes more to produce than parents can afford to pay. Again, nothing new, nothing groundbreaking, same problems, different town. And kind of when you're left with scraps, you got to get scrappy, right? Like Missoula is a really unique community in that there's so much investment in things that are important to us and things that we want to improve on in our community that we'll come together to figure it out, which is exactly what happened. This is my DIY stone soup. This happened before my time on this project, but essentially the origins of Missoula Childcare Advantage are in a really long foundation of community partnerships. And in that foundation, all of these different sectors came together and said, this is a huge problem for our workforce, for our families, for our community, our neighbors. What can we do about it? But we don't want to do everything about it, right? Sometimes we assume that one sector should be responsible for a cure-all for things like this. And that's where everybody's just going to be, it's like a hurry up and wait situation, right? So all of these different sectors came together and said, okay, we can throw this little piece of the pie in, and how can we make this all kind of come together for community collaboration, resiliency, some sort of model network where everybody, all the sectors are coming together. And as this was happening, there was an opportunity at the state level that was a Childcare Innovation and Infrastructure Grant. And really what they wanted was for people to try something new. Do something new, try to target the highest needs in your community, and see what happens. So we were one of 31 grantees across the state, and by far the most complicated. But here's what we did. We wanted to focus on expanding slots in the short term. So Missoula, that means infant and toddler care and extended hours. We wanted to engage sectors that typically are not engaged in childcare solutions. And long term, we really wanted to stabilize the childcare sector as a whole. If you're not focusing on this as a solution within childcare, nothing's going to happen. You have to stand up the sector that is struggling the most for it to actually be sustainable. So I'm going to throw a bunch of words at you, and I'll break them down, I promise. But here's what Missoula Childcare Advantage is. We're a network of participating providers that get to utilize a suite of shared back office administrative services, if you will, at no cost to them, because local businesses in our community can purchase a business membership that gives their staff faster access to care. And then ongoing coordination is funded through a public-private partnership with our city, county, and United Way. So what in the world does that mean? Shared services. Has anybody heard of shared services within childcare before? It's a national framework, essentially, it's a shared buying power, essentially, on behalf of childcare providers to alleviate some of the financial pressure of the admin costs it takes to run a childcare business. Oftentimes, those are state alliances. Oftentimes, they're reduced cost. We wanted to reduce as many barriers as we could in our model, and so the childcare providers that participate in our project, they don't have to pay for them at all. And really what we wanted to do was try to increase quality of care, make sure that we're expanding enrollment and revenues. If a childcare business is not full, if their enrollment is not full, they're losing out on revenue. So we wanted to try to streamline this as much as we could. And the suite of shared services that we offer to childcare providers are payroll services, childcare management systems, so it's like an app that essentially streamlines a lot of those back-end sorts of things, waitlist services. Childcare providers oftentimes either maintain a waitlist or not, but it's like you're spending time at the end of a really long day calling a long list of parents who may have needed care 2 years ago for a slot for an infant, right? So you're losing time and money trying to fill those slots so that you're not losing out on that enrollment. Waitlist services, telehealth, and then substitute services. The business membership side of things, as I mentioned, local businesses can purchase a business membership. It's an HR benefit, essentially, for their staff. Everybody has access to it. They pay on behalf of all of their staff. We see it as a recruitment tool, as a retention tool, family-friendly business practice, and all those membership fees go towards covering the cost of shared services for providers. I will say, these are the 2 founding business members included in our model. And then ongoing coordination is funded through a public-private partnership with the city, county, and United Way. Again, those are partnerships that were formed long ago because there was a cross-sector acknowledgement that this is something that we want to both invest in and also see as an issue for community members in Missoula. We wanted to make Missoula the best place to raise a family and be able to stay in Missoula. So all of this is being trialed, if you will, in an unused public school building. Lots of communities have unused school buildings. There's a lot of interest in how to revitalize some of those spaces. So we partnered with our local school district to explore one wing of this unused school building and what it would take to remodel 6 of those rooms that would house 6 independent childcare businesses. So that's what's happening. We have 6 independent childcare businesses that have moved in. The space was remodeled, and because we have this partnership with Missoula County Public Schools, they subsidize the rent to make this possible. So providers only pay $900 in rent and utilities. A commercial space in Missoula could easily run $3,000, $3,500, which a lot of you might come from bigger cities and you're like, that's nothing. And for Missoulians, and let alone people who are running an early childhood business, that's a lot. So how is it going? Our last provider was operational last month, so we're kind of in a maintenance phase. Our pilot year feels like it's really just going, but of the 6 childcare businesses, 5 of them serve infants and or toddlers. Check. 1 of them offers extended hours, It's amazing. And then all 6 of them are or are willing to accept our subsidy for parents, our scholarship in Montana, Best Beginnings. Of the participating providers, 1 was an expanded business. 3 of them are new providers, and 2 of them opened 2 or 3, their second or third location. And since June, since this really took off, we've seen a steady increase of the business membership staff utilizing either the waitlist or finding care within the network. And so from here, because feel like we're kind of just getting started, even though I've been doing this for quite some time now, we're heading into an evaluation phase. We can't expand this, scale this without significant data about how it's going. What shared services are the providers using? What is helpful? What is not? What do they want to see? Are the businesses seeing this as a benefit? Are there people finding care? How is that working with their recruitment and retention tools? What trends are they seeing at their own businesses? And then kind of alongside that, we're doing some strategic planning to figure out how to grow this. This is really intended to be a virtual model to support childcare providers wherever they're currently located. And so because we're operating really out of this physical space, we have to do a lot of work to figure out what does this take to look like in a bigger model, if you will. And then from there, as we grow, more businesses join, more childcare businesses join, and our suite of shared services grows. We really want to leverage local partnerships, local business advising, or tax prep, or services that providers really want to see covered for them that would help their back end of their business. And how can we partner with different local people within the Missoula community to make that happen? And this kind of gives you a little snapshot of all the people that we work with to get this done. It takes a lot of thought partnership across sectors and across Missoula to think through how to do this. There's nothing else like this happening in the nation. So it's really exciting, and we're also kind of building the plane as we're flying it. So I rely on so many of these people to help me think through this next step, or how to bring together a group of people to think through what to do, because it's exciting and it's complicated. Childcare is complicated, turns out. And that's what I got.
This is fascinating. I have to tell you, I had never heard of anything quite like this. So, River and Grant, why don't you come back up as we sort of wind things down. We wanted to be sure to have a provider and somebody who has some insight into the day-to-day challenges of providing care. So welcome, thank you for joining us, and tell us a little bit about what you do and your childcare operation.
So I'm the founder and director of Montessori Plus International, which is our original location serves children mainly 3 to 6, although some years we'll have older children, some years we'll have a couple of younger ones. And the reason I'm here is because we joined this community project, the pilot project, where one of the 6 programs. So we have our second location over there, one of the classrooms. So we could include younger children, although due to the school building, the zoning, coding, and licensing requirements, we didn't realize that we could only have up to 6 children under age 2. So that's a little challenge on our end, but it works. So right now for this school, which I spent a lot of time at, we have a bunch of 1-year-old, 2-year-olds, very different from the other school location. And I've been in this field for more than 10 years. Yeah, I don't know what else you wanted to know.
Tell me about the families who use your services. Young parents, give us a little bit about the demographics of the people who send their children to your school.
It's interesting. It's actually, There's so much in my mind. I will try to answer it. I'm almost in tears because most of our families are wealthy families. I would not say that wealthy, but they can afford this. I know when I was a young mother, I couldn't afford the child care I have right now, even if I wanted to. If I didn't have a scholarship or something, I would not be able to. So we do accept all the Best Beginning scholarships and always have. And that's for families who couldn't afford this. State paid all of that. Right now, Montana has changed the rule, which is great for us. That means they basically paid a full tuition. But in the past, for many years, they didn't. They would cover half of it, and our school, we don't ask for the other half. We wanted families who couldn't afford it could still be here. We try to raise scholarships for those families. So for our school community, I would say, and some families actually, young families, they couldn't afford it, but grandparents would chip in, and like you see, sometimes we have curriculum time or family events, you see all the grandparents will also show up, So I think it's important for parents. And so you have a wide range of families, although I do hope we can have more diversity in terms of social economic status. But here is the thing, childcare is expensive. Even for middle class families, it is expensive. When I was a mother of my, when I had my first child, I was a full-time graduate student. I think at that time there was a scholarship from the government for students to help me pay some of the child care. I was very grateful for that. When I had my second child, actually, my family economic status was way higher, but I couldn't afford for her to go to a child care when she was a child, so I stayed home. So this is a systematic problem. If you allow me to go into that, when you talk with me, what I struggle most with keeping the best staff members you can have. Our school, we already pay a lot more than many other child cares. But if you think about our field, it's a systematic problem because families already pay a lot. Child care providers don't make that much money because you basically operate totally on the tuition. Then, although we offer the best competitive pay we could afford for child care, for our teachers, most teachers who have the passion, intelligence, ability, those kind of people can earn a lot more in a different field. It takes a big heart to stay in our field. I still remember 2 years ago around this time, I was deeply saddened. When I talk about this, I almost wanted to cry because I had this girl who was graduating from with a master's degree. She had a bachelor's degree from another state in early childhood development, but it's not about degrees because for our program, we had teachers with master's degrees a lot. Not everybody could work with the children. This field, if you talk about the future, you need the best people working with young children to set up the foundation here. But especially in this country, child care originated in slave labor and free labor, So it's, I'm not going to go there. It's a long history over there. But then what I wanted to say, when you see a person coming to this field, when they interact with the children, they're meant for this field right away. The other children benefit so much from them. You want to keep them. They cannot stay simply because of the pay. Are you going to say something? No. But
this is great.
Because what I wanted to say was that girl, I still remember, we're still in contact, but anyway, I offered to match her she was applying for public school positions, and of course she's great. I think she would get any job she was going to apply to, but she's meant for this field. So I offered her a pay that would match the public school pay. She said, I really appreciate it, but I know it's straining, kind of stretching our program a lot. But with the public school, it's her starting point. And she needed to make a decent living. What could I say? So then she moved to a different city in Montana. Originally accepted like third grade teacher's job. Finally, they started that year. They decided to start a kind of public school preschool program. So she started that. So I was so happy about that. I said, this person stayed in this field, didn't go away, right? So whatever we had extra, I would tell her, like, come take them with you. I wanted to help you to start the program. It's not about our program. If you cannot stay here, just don't leave this field, And then currently, I have another staff member. Again, we're talking about this. She moved to Missoula a year ago, from Michigan. Again, this is another person with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education. The first day I saw her, when I interviewed her, I was in love with her. You just knew she was going to be great with the children. She's meant for working in this field. And when she was here, the first day I saw her interacting with the children, it just like, my heart, I cannot describe to you like how happy I was. And then I wanted her to stay in the field forever. She has a fiance. Last year we talked about that, about months ago, because every year I will compare notes with the teachers to say what's your plan for next year. She said, of course, if she stays in Missoula, she would definitely stay at our school. She would want to work at our school. She's engaged. She has a fiance over here. They loved Montana. That's why they moved here. But she said when they are planning the future, though, in a couple of years, they may have to move back. And she may find a job at a public school because she cannot afford to live in Missoula. The housing prices, they're ridiculously high. And
we could spend a day on housing, I promise.
And actually, I felt so sad. I felt like if you're going to move back to Michigan because you want to be close to your family, I totally understand. But it's just because of the housing prices. I'm so sad because Missoula used to be able to keep people like that. Like Grace, who was a big think tank behind this one. She graduated from Brown University. She moved over here from the East. She told me she was lucky enough that at that time, Missoula was not so expensive. She could actually stay. So then I got so sad about this. I started to think, what can I do? What can I do? I wanted to start a nonprofit organization so I can channel money all in. I will just use all the money to housing subsidies or whatever for the teachers. So if they wanted to, for young people, if they want to stay in Missoula and for this field, they're contributing so much. It would be so sad to think these people have to leave because of the price. But anyway, I talked with someone, actually Grace, who's really experienced with this field. She said, most foundations probably would not be enthusiastic to give money to some cause like that. So I'm still thinking about what I can do. I already told this teacher, I said, when time comes, I'm going to make sure you're not going to leave just because of the house prices. We're going to do something. I don't know what that something is yet, but we're going to do something, and I'm still thinking. Yeah.
River told me that she didn't really have much to say. She was worried that, and I want to just turn everything over to her and let her finish talking. Are there any questions at this point? Let's get the microphone going here.
If there's time, I'd like to share a couple of insights to validate River's story.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's get a quick question, and then we'll go to you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Nina Joss. I'm with Colorado Community Media in the Metro Denver area, and I have a very basic question. I do not have children, and I am curious, like, it's so expensive. Mostly wealthy people can afford it, and also it doesn't pay anything. I'm just curious about, like, if you can share numbers on either of those sides, and also why those things are not closer together. I'm imagining if there's a lot of money coming in because tuition is so expensive, I don't know how many teachers there are for how many students. I know nothing about this, but I'm just curious why the wages wouldn't be higher, or just kind of like what's happening between the income and the wages.
Do you mind if I use that as my a response to that question, as
Go
a
for
bit
it.
of a validation of this? One of the greatest sort of biases that I've seen in the business community is they look at this problem and I think, oh, there are all these wonderful people who love to take care of kids. They don't understand business. If business people were doing this, they would fix the model. And that led to a lot of really smart business leaders looking at how they could bring daycare into their companies. And every one of them was like, oh, it isn't that people don't know how to run a business, it's that this model is fundamentally broken. And what I'll share is the really important economic insight is that economists have, and I am not a trained economist, don't be fooled by my job title, but economists have a term for a tool that you use when market forces are not providing the right fit between consumers and producers of goods. It's called a subsidy. And I don't know if there are folks in the room, sorry, I'm getting some weird feedback all of a sudden.
Once the screen went
I don't know if there are any folks in the room from Minnesota, but we had the pleasure of hosting Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank Neil Kashkari in Missoula this past summer. And we had him in our office and we were talking about a number of issues, including housing and childcare. And he shared what I thought was just an incredible insight from a person who is at least in his past life, was a Republican candidate for governor of California. And he said, I spent 10 years wondering what on earth was wrong with childcare before I finally realized it's just like farming. And we live in a world and in a country where we say, we do not want the farmers to get such a low price that they all stop farming. We need them to produce this good. And we do not want their costs to get so high that everybody starves because they can't afford food. And so what do? We come up with a really clever scheme to subsidize farming. And he essentially said, until we do that for childcare, it is not going to get fixed.
I think it's helpful too that their only source of income is parent tuition, and with that tuition you're paying staff, rent, insurance is astronomical within childcare. Food, if you're providing food, there's kind of a number of things and breakdown costs that come along. The tuition gets used, every bit of it, but I think oftentimes we hear, oh, it's so expensive, parents are priced out, and it's true, it is truly expensive, but that also doesn't go nowhere, right? Like it's being put back into running a business, and because there's no other source of funding to help buffer some of this, it doesn't shake out the way that you think it might. River could tell you.
Who's next? Oh.
I have a mic. So my name is Amanda Goki. I'm a reporter for the Boston Globe. I cover New Hampshire, and it's a huge issue in New Hampshire as well. And thank you for your answer, Grant. That was going to be my question. Was my mind immediately went to subsidies. It seems like this is something that's clearly a public good. We need these people to be in the workforce, and young families are obviously not supported in the ways that they need to participate in the economy or be full members of the community. Where does that come from? What is the political path to that? Is it a state level? Is it a federal level thing? Is there advocacy around this issue? And how do you see this, the storytelling aspect of this, to make that message in a kind of compelling way that people will get?
I don't even know where to start. There is a lot of movement happening on that front, and we do have a subsidy, the Best Beginning Scholarship, that in the last legislative session there has been some effort to expand, but it hasn't been expanded enough to really catch more families. And so what's happening is that even though that expansion was passed, a lot of families still can't access it or fall out of it really quickly, whether they're getting child support, whether they get a raise at work. It's really easy for families to lose that subsidy really quickly. So there's a lot of advocacy happening at the state level, especially locally, and kind of coalitions working together, but there's a lot of movement, especially as we head towards another legislative session, to expand that even further and then offer additional incentives or help for childcare providers in particular for pay raises, and also helping childcare providers with childcare themselves. Among other things. So there's a lot of discussion happening and recognition that we tried really hard to expand that as much as we could and thought that would help. And sometimes you don't know until it's happening that maybe we didn't go as far as we should have.
Can we pass the mic up here, I think?
I will note while the mic is getting passed, and I am not a childcare expert, so my knowledge of this is very thin, but there is a working model of subsidized childcare in an industry that is very successful and deemed successful by really good childcare providers, and it's our armed forces. Our armed forces provide outstanding childcare to people who are serving, and that is subsidized by the federal government to provide that care. And many people look at that as the model that we should be trying to deploy across the entire country for all young families. And I would argue we have other models which are, at some point in our nation's history, not too long ago, frankly, we all decided that if people were going to spend their entire working lives in our country, we were going to make sure that they had a sort of dignified end of life after retirement. And Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid came along to make those guarantees. We all pay into them in our careers. And it seems crazy to me that we are not willing to make an additional investment in the start of someone's life when we really determine whether or not they will have huge earning potential later. Invest early so that later in life they're making that much more money and paying that much more back into Social Security and Medicare. And unlike end-of-life services or later life and retirement services, we know exactly how long that time period will be, so it ought to be really easy to quantify how much we're investing in someone.
As a member of the armed forces, childcare, housing, and healthcare tend to be top tier compared to every other industry. But what you do have to give up is is it worth it? But so my name is Fernanda Figueroa. I'm a reporter with the Associated Press, and I know, Sally, you were saying that part of your mission was to empower parents, and I know you guys are looking to expand. So I'm curious kind of what that means, because I know in some communities, whether it be because of the culture or because they can't afford childcare, they turn to their family members to provide that childcare. And so, and like me, I don't have kids, but I know in the future, mom's going to kind of help take care of the kids kind of thing. So I'm curious what your empowerment means to kind of those communities of color that look to their families to provide that childcare instead of the typical.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really the efforts that 0 to 5 does within parent empowerment is called the National Parent Leadership Training Institute. Usually I just refer to it by its acronym because it's really hard to say, which I don't work on personally, but they do. It's a national model as well, and they do a ton of work doing outreach to parents across Missoula from various different backgrounds to empower them to become better advocates in their children's lives. And so they go through a pretty intensive 20-week training process that's free for them. They get dinner, childcare is provided, and they learn all about advocacy. So it's a little bit separate from what I am working on with this. However, at Cold Springs, our pilot site, we have this kind of overflow room, and initially we thought we would have a particular program in there, but now there's been a lot of changes with contracts in the state, and so a lot of our provider and family services are changing in a big way, and we are going to be using this room moving forward as a community space to have advocacy nights, to have trainings for providers, to have family trainings. So I guess it's funny that you asked that at this current time, because it's something that we've been talking about a lot. And it's a very fledgling idea, but it's so necessary, especially as things become more disconnected with the changes happening in Montana, at least with how services are being altered or going away or being more spread thin.
pass it over.
Hi, my name is Julia Fraser. I'm with Pittsburgh's NPR station. And I guess, one of the things that always strikes me about childcare in the country, also the parallels between how we caretaking for elderly people. And I guess, and Pittsburgh is very old, and, there's a lot of challenges around that, and also with these for-profit business models that a lot of these caretaking companies use that sort of, these some of these pressures never really let up because you're still trying to make more profits, and then they get bought up by bigger companies and consultants come in and they, sort of trying to, I guess, how does this compare with elder care? Are there, is there more money? Is there more opportunity for subsidies for I guess, what is the difference, and, where is the overlap between those two systems?
That's a great question. There are similar things that exist in the childcare sector, but they don't succeed in the way that they do with elder care, and haven't been able to co-opt quite as aggressively in that space. But Grant or River, did you have something to add there? It's a fantastic question.
I don't know much about elderly care, so I cannot compare those two. With early child ones, I just wanted to say, if you're talking about a business model or subsidies or things like that, I think there are resources out there. One movie called No Small Matter, if you want to watch that one, it's a really great one. We'll explain to you all the systematic problems over there. And on YouTube, there's also very short videos to tell you about that. I think this one, for me, the hope is lying with everybody, for the future, like everybody here, you. And everybody, when they realize that, I think there will be hope for change. Because another thing I feel a little bit sad about is so many young people don't want to have children, not because they don't want to have children, but because they know they cannot afford to have children. And again, think about the future. What do you want the country's future to be? Isn't this a huge problem? And yeah, when we talk about why this business is not working that way, again, unlike public education, you have tax money, whatever, to subsidize that. Here you don't. And some people don't understand. If you think about, let's just say a full professor's wage, okay? I personally say those were wealthy people. Actually, probably in comparison to business people, a lot of business people, they're not. So just now, I would take what I said back. Like I said, most of the families at our communities are wealthy families. Actually, they're not. They're middle-class families, maybe two incomes, or one parent has a pretty stable, nice income, but none of them are truly, really wealthy. They just put priority, childcare is a priority. But I do know people who work so hard, they cannot have a second child because they cannot afford it. And then the solution will be not just subsidize childcare. Of course, I do hope that will happen because that will reshuffle the cards. Because right now in childcare sector, sometimes it's just the people without education, but they can't stay home to take care of children, so they're not talking about the highest quality of care. But if the pay is really great, we will reshuffle the workforce, and then all young people, I'm thinking the country need to have a policy that for the young people, if you want to have children, you're not going to be punished by having a child financially. But how does that happen? I don't know, but you probably will know a lot better than I do, and we need to get that out. Yeah.
We can take maybe one more question. Let's go over here to.
know if this mic will make its way back around. Well, thank you all so much for being on this panel. My name is Bria Overs. I'm a business reporter at the Baltimore Banner in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm really curious about Montessori schools. I feel like they are popping up all over the place, out of the blue. I can remember being a kid and no one ever using the word Montessori. What do you think is driving this like huge attraction and demand for Montessori schools at the moment, or in recent years, I should say?
I haven't followed the trend, but my gut feeling is that it's the quality people are looking for. And I will not say, though, I could talk 2 days about this, but let me try to do that really short. I will not say Montessori is necessarily the highest quality, but because of the Montessori training and because Montessori originally was a child-centered approach, although depending on who's running the Montessori school could be a little bit different. But because it was a child-centered approach and many traditional childcare, we talked about, like anybody could start a childcare, right? So the quality was not there. But with a Montessori school, these teachers at least needed to go through certain training, and their environment has to be prepared according to the curriculum in a certain way. And on top of that, it was meant to be a child-centered approach. And many parents, although they don't know too much about early childhood education, they recognize that part as part of the quality. I think that might be one of the main reasons. Although this is such a big field, I will tell my parents, like at our school, how to recognize a high quality program, whether it's Montessori or not. Some Montessori programs may not be the best fit if some other things are missing, so that's a totally different story.
I am going to ask each of our speakers to leave us with a takeaway or with a suggestion for a story idea that they would like to see around this issue. I'm going to start by saying I think each and every one of you could possibly do a story about what's happening in Missoula. I'm gobsmacked. I'm absolutely fascinated by this network, this actual initiative that brings all these different sectors to the table to focus on this issue and try to come up with solutions. And as you said, it's the only one of its type in the country right now. I personally don't, well, I'm a bit of a cynic, but I wonder if it could even happen in a larger city or a larger setting. I think gives it the perfect sort of microcosm to make this happen. But that's definitely something that you should all look into. But Sally, if you could wave your wand and see a story about childcare on NPR tomorrow or whatever, what do you think these journalists ought to be?
Oh my gosh, it's such a huge question. I know. You know, I, in this job, have the opportunity, kind of an unintended outcome, is that because this is a really new model, I get to talk to people across the country who are trying to figure this out within their own communities. And I am also amazed by what is happening in other communities that are pulling resources from so many different directions. There actually is a lot of really cool work happening, and they're not in the big cities all the time. They're in those small rural pockets. There's language revitalization programs that are tying together childcare. There's different intensive data dashboards coming together to inform next steps. There's a lot of collective power coming to make this better. And I think there's a lot of intentionality across the board that people want to make their town a really, really attractive, amazing place for people to have kids and stay in the workforce if that's what they choose, but stay where they want to be. There's a lot of movement across the nation with people trying to make it work and find resources or lean on their community or family members to make that work, because it is really hard. So I think finding the shining lights in all of these different communities about what they are doing around childcare is a really interesting space right now.
If I had to describe maybe what River might say, I would say go back to your newsrooms or your communities, find a young person who is built for this business, who has the passion, has the desire, but can't afford to go into early child care. If you could find somebody like that in your community, that would be an interesting story to tell. But do you have any other ideas for a story that you think journalists should do?
You mean story, like idea? I don't have a lot of idea to give people advice. I think when people are aware of this, they all feel about that story. That I want to quickly share a story. This is my passion and my dream. And one thing I was in an argument with my friends when I was a teenager, when they were all really very talented with big ambitions. And when I was asked, what would you like to do when you grow up? I said I wanted to be a preschool teacher. And everybody said, what a waste of talent. What a waste of resources. And my answer was no, because before age 5, that was the most important period for a human life. I said a professor with a doctorate degree should teach children that age. Then maybe a master's degree, teach elementary school. When they have all the foundations, then maybe a college student that can teach high school kids, things like that. I don't know where my idea came from, but that was my answer when I was 13 or 14 years old. And I still believe in that, not in the hierarchy of doctorate, whatever. Doesn't matter, but I truly believe this is the foundation of a human life. It's the foundation for a better future for the society, and it deserves attention, deserves change.
Grant.
I love the question about why are Montessori schools catching a fire. I'm sure we sent our daughter to a Montessori school. And when I think back, I think about it as a young parent, the realization that am I getting childcare to just keep my kid alive while I go to work? Or am I getting childcare to set my kid up to be as successful as possible? And the people who have the privilege to sit back and ask that question and the privilege to pay the premium to make sure they get the highest quality are the customer that I would guess every child care provider wants, because then they can charge enough to pay good people and keep them around and run a sustainable business. And so I'm guessing it's this idea, like these are catching on because they're a nice way to give people who are in child care services some credential that allows them to make more money and be more successful. And they're also great schools when they're run well and in keeping with this. So I think that's a great question to ask as a reporter and dig into and find out who's, the biggest thing to me in this equitable question is who's getting childcare right now and who's not? And what is the cost of us failing to provide adequate quality childcare, not just to those families and their next generation, but to our whole country? And I think if we could answer that question, what is the cost of the status quo, it would blow our minds at how much more money we're going to spend over the next 50 years on all the downstream consequences of failing to invest in young people compared to the cost of being smart and making strategic investments and subsidies to provide quality childcare to every kid in our country.
I told you we would end on a high note. And I think he has just said yet another thing that resonated so deeply with me. Parents in the position of saying, am I paying just to keep my kid alive until I get home from work? Or am I providing them an environment that will set them up for success? And I think we live in such a stratified society now that too many of us are unwilling to see that struggling working parent wanting that latter scenario for their child. And so I think journalism and the stories that we tell can hopefully sort of even that scenario and help people to realize that all human beings want the best for their children. That's not something that comes with a price tag. So And on that note, as I say, I want to thank our three speakers, Grant Kier, Willa Yang, and Sally Hinkle, for ending our first day on such a note. So thank you all so much.
Thank
for
you,
being
Rachel.
here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.